Being outside is exhausting. I hate it.
All right, I want to welcome everybody to the very first episode of the Lost Odyssey game analysis podcast, whatever you want to call it. This is very much inspired by the boys at Resonant Arc and their sort of um, game novel, game book club, whatever they call it, something like that. I'll be doing something like that for myself, but this will be a game analysis rather than just a story analysis. And I decided to go with Lost Odyssey because I think it's a game that is really overlooked, but a lot of people have kind of been getting back into it. And a lot of people have kind of understood over time that it is an absolute classic. And so I thought, why not talk about this game? It was either this or Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which is one of my favorite games of all time, or FF7 Rebirth, where I haven't really played as much. I've only played the remake and I didn't like the remake at all. So I thought playing Rebirth would be a good way for me to kind of play it through and kind of get my thoughts on it, on certain stuff. But I decided to go with Lost Odyssey just because it's been a game that I've kind of put on hold for a bit, but it's never because I've disliked it. So I've always really enjoyed my time playing the game. And yeah, it's such a good game it's heating me up right now. If you can't tell, I am sweating a bit. So this is a great game, and I haven't beaten it before, but I have done. I have played through like half of the game, and I put it on hold, and now I'm restarting it. So yeah, I mean, I want this first episode to be a dev history because it kind of lets us look at what it took to create this game. And Lost Odyssey, more so than Rebirth or even Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Lost Odyssey is very fascinating as far as the development of it goes, because it was made by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man behind Final Fantasy, the face of Square for the longest time. And this was his second game, I believe a second game that his Mistwalker game company created after he left Square. And it's really interesting because Lost Odyssey, this is considered to be the true Final Fantasy 13. More than FF13 itself, this is the game that people kind of say, this is what should have been FF13. And I played FF13 and I enjoyed it. So it's kind of interesting that people feel like this game captures the Final Fantasy feeling more than FF13 did. And I kind of want to look at the dev history, look at all the things that went into making this game what it is. So yeah, let's get right into it. So when talking about the development of Lost Odyssey, everything kind of comes back to one man, and that's Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man you see right here, who is he's responsible for Square, not responsible for Square, but Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. When you think of the guy who's kind of the brainchild of so many great stuff over at Square, you usually think of Hironobu Sakaguchi. And what's interesting about Hironobu, so if we go over to over here really quickly, he's been really hands-on in Final Fantasy pretty much in every game, but when Spirits Within released around 2001, it was a absolute disaster, and a lot of people kind of point to Spirits Within as the movie that sort of led to Hironobu Sakaguchi being ousted from the company. But let me just make sure, it is 2001. But let me just make something kind of clear, and this is something the Resonant Arc, they talked about in their FF10 podcast. I think it was episode 1 in Dev History, which is that Final Fantasy X got pushed back. So it was going to be released at a certain date. Sony came and they were like, we want this game to be released at the same time as the GameCube was released. And they wanted it to kind of to compete with it. And what that did was pushing it back. All their projected earnings, that kind of got messed up along with it. So on top of Spirits Within being a box office flop, then you had FF10 being moved back. Now you can see that Square in general just kind of saw a bit of a dark time during that time period. And so it wasn't just one thing, I think. It was multiple stuff. And if you read right here, following the failure of Spirits Within, Sakaguchi was left in a state of low morale and decided to step away from active involvement in Square's projects. In 2001, Sakaguchi resigned. So this is really important right here. So it wasn't just Sakaguchi, it was two other senior executives. And the reason why this is interesting is because even though he officially left in 2003, right, with FF102 being his last major work, he was actually sitting at home and he was gone in 2001. So between the period of 2001 and 03, he wasn't actually actively involved in anything really Square was doing, and FF102 may have had his name on it, but I sincerely doubt he really did anything in the game. If you were to look at the wiki of FF102 and go through some of the names they have listed, you won't see Sakaguchi. This man was gone in 01. Now, what's really interesting about Mistwalker is that he actually trademarked Mistwalker back in 2001. So when he was depressed with the way Square had kind of gone and he felt responsible and he was at home in Hawaii, he decided that maybe around that time he had been talking to some other executives who were leaving as well. Maybe he had already felt like his time with Square was up. Now I'm kind of curious if this was something going back prior to the events of 01, or if he had felt this way in general. I'm kind of curious about that because if he left in 03 but he trademarked in 01, that probably means by the time he had already stepped back, he was already looking at leaving the company, which is quite interesting. But we look at then Mistwalker, right? And so he established Mistwalker in 2004 and he got funding from Microsoft. And so this kind of explains now. And you're going to see right here that Mistwalker titles were for the Xbox 360. He did not choose PlayStation 3 due to its difficult production architecture and early disagreements with Sony president Ken Kutaragi. So Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey were Xbox 360 exclusives. And then I think their last like main console game, Last Story, was for the Wii. So they never made a game for PlayStation. I think Fantasian, which is getting a port onto all the big consoles, that's working along with Square, but he didn't release a single title for Sony. And I do wonder, it says here due to difficult production architecture and disagreements with Ken Kutaragi, I do wonder how much of it is Microsoft, right? They got funding help from Microsoft. You know, the Japanese are very loyal, so I do wonder if there is a sense of loyalty that Sakaguchi maybe felt for Microsoft for helping him out. Maybe I could be wrong, but early disagreements with Ken Kutaragi. So this is really interesting because I was looking at Ken Kutaragi's wiki, and it turns out that Sony was not doing crazy good under his management. Sony had a weaker year in 2004 after several years of solid growth. Their game sales fell from 8.2 to 7.5 billion. Their operating income from 1 billion to 650 million. And they lost a total of $25 million in quarter four of 2004. Now, there's going to be different reasons, right? You're going to see the oversaturation of the video game market, price wars, and one of the others sort of reasons given is the potential fact that he was kind of set up for failure, right? With over here it says sort of that Howard Stringer was given the less difficult assignment of the content business, and his success at Sony BMG Music Entertainment resulted in his promotion. So some people are going to argue that he was set up for failure with the outgoing Sony CEO hadn't left him in a great place anyways. But you read right here that Kutaragi had labeled the Xbox 360 as just an Xbox 1.5 and stated that it was only going after PlayStation 2. So you see right here that he is a very, maybe a headstrong guy, maybe a very blunt guy. And I could see why maybe Sakaguchi would have some issues with him. Maybe didn't feel like he was an easy guy to get along with. So I do find that part kind of interesting. But if we go back right here, so he started to work on Lost. So he made Mistwalker in 2004, and they were all for the Xbox 360. I want to head over now to Mistwalker and kind of look at them and see a bit of their history, right? So I do want to mention really quickly that Sakaguchi was referred to as executive producer, which, again, going back to Resonant Arc, they talk about this, I think, in the Final Fantasy VIII podcast, the dev history, which is that executive producers don't really do anything. And he describes himself as doing nothing in Hawaii over the following 3 years, having been demoralized by the movie's failure. So I described how I wonder kind of what his mindset was during this time period. It says over here that his main reason for resigning was the growing administrative duties he was having to handle in a senior position, something that kept him away from game production. So it seemed that he was less into maybe the business aspect and was more into the game producing aspect. He wanted to be more into that rather than whatever Square had him doing. So he was at home at that time period. He was feeling a bit unmotivated. I mean, he was feeling a bit demoralized, of course. And he felt motivated to come back to the game industry. And he talked to Akira Toriyama and Takehiko Inao. So Akira Toriyama, of course, the artist of Dragon Ball Z, Chrono Trigger. Hironobu's already worked with him extensively. And then you have Takehiko Inao, for those of you who don't know, Vagabond and Slam Dunk are his major manga works, and he's a fantastic author. So Akira Toriyama is a much more cartoonish, fun anime style, where Inao has a much more serious and much more human-looking art style. And you're going to see this in Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey. So Blue Dragon was released and Xbox 360. So we go back to Mistwalker releasing the game on Xbox 360. What's interesting is that the Xbox basically sold nothing, close to nothing in Japan, at least compared to the PlayStation 3. And so when it came to developing the first game for the 360, Blue Dragon was released, and you had Nobuo Uematsu, you had Akira Toriyama, and you had Hironobu Sakaguchi. You had those three together again. And that was to kind of give fans in Japan a reason to want the 360. Like, here is the most throwback sort of RPG, and it's not on the PlayStation, it's not on the Nintendo, it's on Xbox 360. It's not PlayStation 3 doesn't have it. I think it was the Wii at the time, GameCube. They don't have it. The 360 has it, and that was kind of done to bring fans buy into the fact that, hey, there's this new company. There's this art style you guys all recognize in Blue Dragon. Now, unfortunately, I don't think Blue Dragon was the best game to kind of introduce people. I've talked about it before. It's a game that I've started and stopped multiple times, and I think I've officially dropped the game sometime earlier this month or last month. I just came to the realization I just don't really enjoy the game. I think it's completely average. Whereas Lost Odyssey, on the other hand, that is completely different. But you can see here Blue Dragon, on which Toriyama collaborated, was a highly traditional RPG intended for genre fans rather than trying anything experimental on the 360, which was a niche console in Japan. So you can see right there, Blue Dragon was meant to kind of introduce fans into the 360 who thought that 360 was just for Western games and shooting games. It was like, no, here's a really throwback RPG. Now, again, I don't think it was the best game to kind of introduce the 360 to fans because of just the quality, and I think the game had a bit of an identity crisis. The presentation was highly realistic, even though the art was very anime. I think they should have made the game look more like Tales of Vesperia or Ni no Kuni, make it much more anime rather than going in the more realistic direction. I think that would have helped the game a lot. I did not like the presentation. It had the same presentation as Lost Odyssey, but Lost Odyssey works because all the characters are somewhat realistic. And anime games shouldn't have that realistic presentation. They should always go for more of a cartoony look. But that's for another day, but I just wanted to bring that up really quickly. Alright, so next we're going to look at some of the development of Lost Odyssey. And so as you can see here, discussions began in 2003 between Sakaguchi and Microsoft Game Studios. And that's interesting because Mistwalker wasn't really set up until 2004 between him and Microsoft. So before it was even a thing, they had already been talking and discussions had been going on. And it was initially an internal project by Microsoft with Sakaguchi, but the development ran into some difficulties. And so the game had assistance by a lot of different people. If you can see here, AQ Interactive was brought to assist with the game's development. Staff of Field Plus included a large number of developers from Shadow Hearts from the defunct Nautilus. If you go up and down, there's a lot of different people. Developers from Microsoft and Sega, freelancers. This game was worked on by a lot of different people. And the development started with 10 people. At the development's peak, it was 150. and he had Daisuke Fukugawa and Katsuhisa Higuchi, who previously worked at Square Enix, and they worked on this game with him as well. So the game story was written by Sakaguchi, and Sakaguchi is, of course, a great writer. He was heavily involved in Final Fantasy VII's writing, which remains to me one of the most brilliantly told stories in video games. And he wanted to explore the human psyche, right? A highly emotional experience that explored the human psyche. And Kiyoshi Shigematsu, who is a Japanese novelist who, here in America, we've probably never really heard of him. And he is a really well-regarded author in Japan, like very much so. He's really high regarded. And he was chosen to create 30 stories of we'll find when we start playing the game, but they're called 1,000 Years of Dreams, which show up throughout the game, which explain, which I should probably mention right now, that the game's story revolves around a few immortal characters and sort of their journey, and you know, when we get into it, it's going to be pretty insane. But just for now, Kaim, who's the main character, is immortal. In 1,000 Years of Dreams, that's not a plot twist, by the way. You find that out really quickly. And 1,000 Years of Dreams is sort of a look at some of his previous lives and things that happened, and they're really beautifully written. And it says here that, according to Shigematsu, it was the first time he had ever worked on a video game and was unsure about whether he could evoke emotions as he did in his books. In the end, he found that the interactive medium gave his work a new impact that moved him to tears upon seeing it in place. So these stories that he wrote are written in a visual novel style, and it works really well. It did not need cutscenes or anything like that to do it. The visual novel-esque way that they integrated the stories worked fantastically, I think. The few ones that I've seen, I really enjoyed. We get into the music. Nobuo Uematsu comes back, and Uematsu was really excited to work on this title. So he had been contacted to work on 3 of their games. First, Blue Dragon, and this was the one that he was excited for because this was Sakaguchi's first serious game, right? So this kind of tells you what was the thought process in Blue Dragon, which wasn't seen as much of a serious game as, like, let's bring people back in and show them that the Xbox does have some great RPGs. This was sort of, you know, Mistwalker and Sakaguchi's first serious title since leaving Square Enix. And he had been, Uematsu had received information, you know, he was working on the early stages of Lost Odyssey, and he was able to create the first musical pieces early in the game stages because he had the characters, the settings, he knew what the game was about, and, you know, most of it was recorded with the live orchestra, as Uematsu felt that the emotion evoked by the game could only be communicated through live instruments, which really tells you just how emotionally set this game was. You know, it's a very beautifully written game, and it's a very variety-filled soundtrack. As you can see here, the musical style varied from grand orchestral pieces, hardcore rock, electronic music, a lot of crazy Uematsu style that we all love. But, and I'll say this, I think the soundtrack is amazing, and I think it's better than Blue Dragon's by a mile. I think Blue Dragon had a couple of pretty good songs, but I think in general, compared to what Uematsu, the style and the level that we're used to, I thought Blue Dragon was a bit weak in comparison to Uematsu's older games. Like, I've been playing Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster, and it's just not comparable. And then Lost Odyssey, on the other hand, I do feel like you could put up there with one of Uematsu's top works, and you wouldn't really shun away. It's a really well written soundtrack. Now, when we get into the actual development and the designing of the game, it really went through some rough times. As you can see here, the game design went smoothly as the game staff were used to the genre, but other aspects did not. Development began without access to the Xbox 360 hardware, and starting development with a large staff caused aspects to be changed upon the console's release. So, like I mentioned, they had so many different people working on the game they brought in, and there was a lot of issues, it turns out, that ended up having to be changed when the release on the console. And there were 3 separate teams. There was a battle, adventure, and a cutscene team, and they all ran into various issues of their own. And then there was, for example, smaller parts of the environment, little used parts of the environment were given a lot of detail, which resulted in a waste of money and waste of time, and all these different issues kind of led to a difficult design period. And according to Sakaguchi, the team was on the point of collapse by the middle of development, but they pulled through. They also used Unreal Engine 3 for this, which, you know, was different for, especially for RPGs at that time. As you can see here, it was it went against the philosophies most often used in JRPG engines. So you can see here there's a lot of different issues with the cutscene design. Some framework issues also found their way into the game, and it was not a smooth development period, and not surprisingly so, considering this was a big budget first serious game made by Sakaguchi upon leaving Square. Now, I want to talk about this. The main characters were designed by Takehiko Inao, who I had mentioned reputation for designing people. He had a much more realistic style, and I think that helped Lost Odyssey. You know, Blue Dragon, it kind of matched the Akira Toriyama style, but as far as the story for this, they went with a more people-ish manga, if that makes sense. I guess more seinen, I call seinen, art style rather than a more shonen-esque art style. And some of the characters needed to be completely redesigned, and he was really, I mean, Inao was really into the actual design process. You can see here, Inao ran frequent checks on the character models as they went through multiple revisions, even down to their eyebrows. It was estimated that 300 unique characters were created for the game. So Inao wasn't just an artist who drew it up, tossed it to the side. He was heavily involved, and now you can kind of see why Sakaguchi chose him as one of the first people he contacted upon leaving, along with Akira Toriyama, who he wanted to do the artwork for him. And I think the artwork really stands out for the game. If you look at some of the art for it, you'll see some here at the cover. It's a very standout looking game, and I ended up really liking a lot of the character designs. Again, just as a personal note, I like my anime style. I like the more bombastic, the more crazy hair and clothing, but that doesn't mean I dislike the more grounded style that Lost Odyssey produced. And I particularly enjoy the work of Inao Sensei. I think he has a great art style, so it worked with the game pretty well. So I want to talk now about the sales and the reviews of Lost Odyssey. So the game sold 40,000 copies in Japan on its first day, around 50% of the shipment. And as of February 2008, the game had sold 104,000 copies. And as of April 2010, it had sold 109,000 copies in Japan, becoming the 9th selling game for the platform, which is pretty impressive considering this is the second game made by Mistwalker, and it's a JRPG that typically is more connected to Sony and especially Nintendo than Xbox and Microsoft. But it did much better in the West, and it debuted at number 7 selling 200k in its debut month of February, 203,000, and in its UK debut, it debuted at number 6. So now, I want to talk really quickly about the reviews. And during this time period of the mid to late 2000s, the Western journalism scene, or whatever you want to call it, was very anti-JRPGs. I mean, vehemently anti-JRPGs. And some of the critics, just the most insane stuff, like the issues took place with Lost Odyssey's old school gameplay mechanics, particularly the traditional combat system, which several critics found to be dull and dated. So turn-based was being attacked, and this is what has led to the modern 2024 AAA slop fest that we've been getting recently, is things like this, which they don't want their gameplays to be slower and more methodical and more thought out. They just want everything to be fast and it's embarrassing to read some of these. And again, there was a lot of anti-JRPG sentiments during this time period. A lot of it was not warranted. It was just a bunch of pretentious goofs who haven't really learned their way. The Western journalism scene isn't any better now than it was back then. And I'm glad to see that a lot of people are kind of waking up and realizing these guys have no idea what they're talking about. The combat system is turn-based. That's not a good or a bad thing. It depends on the execution. And I think the execution of this game's turn-based system is great. It's fast, it's smooth, it feels good. Not every game needs to be a AAA slop. And I like the fact that this game went in the direction it did, especially now in 2024, looking back and seeing this game and seeing what we have now, where every game's an action RPG, FF16, FF7 Rebirth, and it's not even like those games' combat systems are bad. Far from it. I really liked FF16's combat a lot, but I really hate this modern day sort of push towards AAA, and anything that isn't AAA isn't good. I don't like that sentiment at all, and I feel very, very passionate about this because it annoys me that people feel this way. You have games like Lost Odyssey, now you have games like Octopath Traveler, and now you have the Personas and SMT, which are all showing to people that turn-based games can be fun and are fun, and I want to see more of these types of games. And I think Lost Odyssey played a huge role because if you remember during this time period, 2007 and 8, FF12 was an action RPG, and I love FF12's combat system. FF13 went back in sort of the ATB, I'm forgetting what it's called, the combat system for FF13, which is my favorite combat system of all time. Like, I'll just be honest right now, I love that sort of combat system, and I really dislike the sentiment that a lot of these journalists had, so I won't even go over this. I'll just say it's completely worthless, and you're not going to find really anything constructive here aside from some journalists who just don't like JRPGs because they don't like them. So I'll be honest, as somebody who's played the game halfway through, I like it a lot. I think the design is good, the movement's great, the combat system's fun. I'm trying to think of what else about this game I could mention. And the story, the novelist, visual novelist stories are really well written. Some people will even argue they're better than the main story, but I'm only halfway through, or got halfway through, so I can't really comment on that as much. But yeah, I mean, that's all I really have to say about the sales and reviews of the game. So that's kind of it for the dev history. That was all I really had in mind. I just wanted to do a quick look at some of what led to the creation of this game. I guess I didn't do this earlier on, so I'll do it now and just kind of talk about the synopsis and the setting of the game. So Lost Odyssey is set in a world in which a magic industrial revolution is taking place. Magic energy existed in all living creatures beforehand. It suddenly became far more powerful 30 years before the beginning of the game. It's affected society greatly, and you just go from there. You meet the Council of Ura. You have several characters who are immortal, and then you have characters that are mortal. And this game goes about it in an interesting way because even leveling up is kind of different for how they do it. So as you can see here, mortals gain skills by leveling up, but can benefit from additional skills by equipping accessories. Immortals do not know any skills initially, but instead gain skills by linking with a mortal character that is currently part of the battle formation, earning skill points in battle towards complete learning of the skill. So immortals can learn skills from accessories, same kind of like Final Fantasy 9, right? So if you've played FF9 and you know how you equip a weapon or you equip an accessory, you gain abilities. I think for this game, I can't remember if the equipment, your battle equipment does that, but I know for sure accessories do. And then you have your magic system, right? The black, white, spirit, and was it composite? I haven't played this game in a while, so I don't remember entirely. But I like the setting for this game. It's really interesting. So as you see here, a magic industrial revolution. So for those of you who don't know, the Industrial Revolution, sort of during this time period of 1760 to 1840, the steam engines, think of all of that. And this game is having that, but in the magic industry revolution context. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I think that was about it. Just a very not a super in-depth level dev history, but this is the first series in this series, the first game that I'm looking at in the series, so I expect them to be more well thought out and well done as we go into our other games. But I am just a one-man team here, and yeah, I'm really, really excited. So I guess I should talk now about how I'm going to go about doing this. I'm planning on releasing an episode, so this should go up on Saturday. So I'm probably going to do an episode every Saturday where I'm going to play roughly... So this game is roughly 60 hours, I think. And again, this is a game analysis, not a story analysis. So if I want to go and just look at most of the game, I think every episode I should be looking at about 5 hours of playthrough, which I'll try to condense into about an hour of actual analysis. And if we just do a quick 60, how many times does 5 go into 60? And one episode represents 5. I think about 12 episodes should be good, but I'm willing to go up if need be. Again, I'm doing this for the first time. I have no idea. It could go a lot longer than what I'm expecting. Maybe 5 hours for one episode is just too much. I'm gonna have to bring it down to like 2 or 3 hours of a playthrough for one episode. I'll find out as I go about it. And I have no idea where to even play up to for episode 2 because I haven't even started the game yet. So again, that's something that I'll get a hang of as I start it, and I'm looking forward to the series. Lost Odyssey is a really, really great game. The brainchild of an incredible human being in the gaming industry, Hironobu Sakaguchi, and I hope you guys join me for this journey. With that, I think I'm out. See you in the next one. Vincere out.